go, and then hopefully you should be seeing my slides. So thank you so much for lasting this long and for joining our session on launching new journals and developing new journals. You've already had a few mentions of this topic in our previous session, so we're excited to really go in depth with you on this and ask any questions that you may have on this important and exciting topic. So a warm welcome from me and also on behalf of my co-presenters, Dana Niculescu and Geraldine Lovell. All right, so we've already heard about the housekeeping before, so I will keep this very brief. We have 1 hour together on this topic, so we will present to you for about 40 minutes, depending on how many questions we will ask. We'll get asked and be answered throughout, but we also have a dedicated 20-minute slot for Q&As. And yeah, the rest you're already familiar with. Kindly keep yourself muted. Unless you want to ask a live questions, Yakna will take care of that. Okay, so this is the agenda that my fellow speakers and I have prepared for you today. Before we get into that, just a quick word about us. As Yakna has mentioned, I'm an executive publisher handling a portfolio of energy policy journals, and I'm based out of Berlin, Germany. And I'm joined by Dana, who is also a senior publisher working on energy journals, and Dana is based out of Amsterdam. And we have Geraldine with us, who is a journal indexation manager, who is also based out of Elsevier's Amsterdam headquarters. So the agenda is on the left here. You will see that we have tried to kind of follow the order of steps that you need to take in order to launch a journal and also to nurture it beyond its launch, sort of through the early development phase. And we will go through each of these steps in great detail. So again, you have a chance to ask your questions or share comments throughout. Okay, so we are starting off with the idea for a new journal and developing the concept for it. I think it will be no surprise to you that solid, in-depth market research is the key first step. And as you've seen from Maria's previous presentation, we are very lucky at Elsevier that we have some great in-house tools to help us with the market research. For example, Scopus and Scival that have been mentioned before, and that you in the Ukraine also have free access to. But a resource that everyone can and should use in the market research on developing a new journal is really, the network that you have, having discussions within that network. So examples for this could be talking to editors in the field, authors, at a conference, talk to delegates, and any other experts in the field, even industry. And you could also do this through a survey, for example. What is crucial in this overall approach is to ask the right questions in order to shape the concept of the new journal. And we have tried to list some of the questions that one should ask themselves here at the top. So the most important one, is there a need for the journal? So is there a community to support it? Is there maybe a scientific society who could support and develop the journal together with you? Do we have a growing field? Again, data. Have new researchers joined the field recently that you could talk to? Is there more funding available in the field? Do we see industry investments? And if you regularly go to conferences, do you see more and more sessions on a specific topic that might guide you in shaping your journal idea? From a publisher's point of view, the next two questions, maybe we already have a journal in a related field. So could we maybe extend the brand of that journal that we have and launch a sister journal on this specific subtopic? Or do we see in our journals that we reject a lot of certain article types, for example, case reports? Could we launch a daughter journal just to capture those rejects? And related to that, at a big publisher such as Elsevier, we do have so-called article transfer services. So we set up connections between journals where articles that are maybe out of scope for one journal could be passed on to another journal. So this would also be hugely beneficial for a new journal to benefit from that. Right. Okay. So one of the key decisions that you will have to make very early on for the new journal is to decide which business model it should follow. You've actually heard from Maria some of these already, but I think it's still useful to go through them in this context. So we've listed the most common business model alternatives here, starting off with Gold Open Access. For Gold Open Access, new journal launches, it's important to keep in mind, though, that there's going to be a delay in generating income from open access because it's normal practice that in the first year you'd waive the so-called article processing charges, the APCs. Then there is the most common business model, which is hybrid, where you offer the author the choice to publish their manuscript either under the subscription model or under the open access model. You can, of course, also decide to just offer subscription, but actually we at Elsevier would advise against this as it closes the door on those authors who would really like to publish open access or do have that obligation from their funders to publish open access. Less common business models are platinum or gold or diamond open access, where neither the author nor the reader pays for publishing, but rather a non-profit organization such as a society or a government. And then lastly, I've just listed it for completeness sake as bronze open access, where the publisher makes the articles freely accessible, maybe to support a certain topic or community. But as Maria had already mentioned, articles under bronze have no clear license, and this is not really something that we, at least at Elsevier, would really consider. So for us, it's mainly between gold open access launches or a hybrid journal launch. So again, we've listed some questions for you here to ask yourselves when deciding on a business model. And they should mainly focus on the sustainability of the model, the funding in the field, and any commercial opportunities. Those should be your guiding principles when deciding for a business model. And of course, the business model will also work as the foundation for the budgeting that you will need to do for the journal, but more on that a little bit later in the session. Okay, so coming to the proposal. So one of the cornerstones of working on a new journal launch is the proposal. So along with the budget, it's the other key document that you will need to prepare. And we've outlined it here with all the sections that we think the proposal should include. And in that way, it also works kind of like a checklist for you to remind you what points you should consider, and you can tick them off as you move along. So executive summary just summarizes the main points, but you know, for the background and rationale, it's really the assessment of the field, the market research that you've done, the target audience that you're trying to reach, and why you want to launch the journal. And then editorial information, of course, how would you like to set up the board? What's the editorial structure that you would like to follow? And obviously, coming out of the market research that you have done, all the information that you could gather on your competition. What are the journals that you would really like to take papers away from and have them submitted to your journal instead? And then you would also include a dedicated launch plan with timelines. So this proposal would need to be approved internally You would need to find your editors, get them appointed, get them contracts, and then all this sort of external facing work that you need to do, have a journal homepage that very much functions as your business card as you move along and do more outreach. You need to have the submission site ready, sort of the whole behind the scenes workflow needs to be set up. And then you go into marketing with call for papers, ideally have the first issue published, and then have a launch event if that's appropriate here. In terms of production, obviously there are things to consider, to be considered that also go, for example, into your budget exercise. So you need to have a good estimate of the number of articles that you expect to publish in the first years, and how many issues you'd like to publish, and these kind of considerations. Most of the journals now would be e-only. If a society is involved, there might be a print component that needs to be considered under production, but that is less and less common. And then obviously finance is involved for internal sign-off of the finance model, and this includes pricing. So whether you have an open access journal, it would be the APC charge for the first couple of years. As I've mentioned, the first year this is usually waived, or if it's a subscription or hybrid journal, it would be a subscription price that you would need to think about. Also, again, based on the market research you've done. And then there's the overall approval before you can continue. Right. And for the next chapter of our session, from approval of the proposal to the actual launch of the new journal, I'm now handing over to my colleague, Dana. Dana, over to you.
Thank you, Helen. I will try to seamlessly start sharing my screen. Just bear with me for 1 second. And then full screen. Can you see the full screen already?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I will present the steps that are taken from the approval of the new journal proposal to the launch of the journal. And first of all, I will say a few words about the actions that we as publishers are supposed to take at this stage of the launch of a journal. Some things that we do is we apply for an ISSN for the new launch. We also settle on actually what is the final form of the journal's aims and scope, which will be once they are finished in their final form, they will be published on the journal homepage. We will also, usually together with a designer, create the journal cover. We also create a journal homepage, the business card of the journal, as Helen justly mentioned. Then we will decide what are the journal prelims, the front matter, the back matter, and if the journal uses a submission website, this one will be created prior to launch, and we will choose what is the appropriate editorial workflow within the submission website. We will have to train the editorial team so that they know how to use that submission website optimally. If we already know that there are relevant reviewers that we have in our portfolio, we are also going to import some of those reviewers to the new launch. Here's where it helps to have a larger portfolio of journals within the same field. And we will, of course, also take steps in relation to the journal production. So we will set up the journal volumes or issues and numbering, the journal's reference style. We will assign a typesetter for the journal, and In case any tool is used for the author proofing, that will also go into place before the journal is launched. Once we launch the journal, we create the homepage, the journal homepage. This is an example of the journal Renewable Energy. The journal homepage will contain some crucial information, such as the journal title, an image of the journal cover, information regarding the editorial team, such as the roles within the editorial team, the names of the editors and their affiliation. It will also contain the journal's aims and scope, and where that is already possible, the indexation information that of course comes at a later stage, not at the beginning. So information about the site score and impact factor. The journal homepage will also contain a link to the guide for authors. And I will talk a bit more in more detail about a few of these items that I listed, while my colleague Geraldine will talk about indexation. So a few words about aims and scope. What constitute good aims and scope for a new journal? It's good if the aims and scope contain a few main keywords that are carefully selected in order to make sure that prospective submitting authors are going to find out about the existence of the journal. The aims and scope will also contain the journal name and any abbreviation that is used for the journal, and the journal's so-called elevator pitch. So the core message of the mission of the journal in the field, the journal's aim. But it will also contain information about the types of papers that the journal accepts and the topics that it covers, and any topics that it definitely does not cover, so any limits to the aims. Any kind of information, important information about the editors. However, the aims and scope will not include information that changes over time, such as information about discounts on the article processing charge or promotions that are made for authors, or the value of the article processing charge, any kind of information on marketing campaigns, and reporting data, so impact factors, site score values, because these, of course, are not there forever. Their values change in this sense. I will also say a few words about the guide for authors. So this guide gives the authors the information they need so that their submission is a successful submission, in the sense that it will help them, or it will help reduce the chance that they get rejected for a reason that is avoidable, such as a formatting, a style reason, a type of article that is outside of the type of articles that the journal publish, or a topic that the journal does not publish in. And a few more words about the guide for authors. It is noteworthy that indexation services evaluate a journal by looking at the guide for authors, which needs to be complete. And if there are missing details, this means that the application to those indexation services will either be delayed or rejected. So therefore, it's important that the guide for authors includes a number of items, such as information about who owns the copyright of the articles, statements about conflicts of interest or declaration of interests, information about ethics in publishing, mostly if the journal deals with studies in humans and animals, and it needs informed consent and patient details. The guide for authors is also supposed to include information about the peer review, the type of peer review that the journal is doing, and usually also a statement on submissions, publications from members of the editorial team. It will also include information about the process of appeal to a decision made by the editor, and a statement about research data. There are also other information that are needed, such as information on the publication model that the journal follows, if it is an open access journal, the kind of Creative Commons licenses that are accepted for the articles, the open access fee, and of course there are also other practical information, such as any limitations limitations in word count, any limitation in the number of figures and tables or pages, or other documents and forms that are needed for the submission. And now I will hand over to Geraldine and stop sharing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will start sharing my screen. Okay, I hope it's visible for you now.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about indexation a little bit, and some of the things that I get asked a lot about by publishers and indexation services as well. So one of the first basic things really is, why do we have journal indexation at all? It takes place at a later state, once the journal's become established and it's got some kind of good presence online. So we know obviously that it improves the credibility of your journal, it improves the status of your journal, so how it appears to researchers. Your visibility will increase once you become indexed, so people can discover you a lot better. If you get indexed on PubMed Central, for example, then researchers will be able to find you in PubMed, which is really important, for many people. Also, your funder might have a mandate, so as for example, that you have to be in PubMed Central, so that might be the case. Also, it will show that your journal has a higher impact, if you like. So, and what is the net result of all of this is, once you get accepted for an indexation service, and typically, I think Clarivate Web of Science with an impact factor is probably going to be the one that many people are aiming for. So you'll start attracting authors, higher quality manuscripts. If you're in a journal with an impact factor, your submissions can go up to by 50% more. So, you know, that's a great thing. And it also helps advance researchers in their career. So at Elsevier, we are working mainly with the 5 big indexation services, so PubMed Central, Scopus, Web of Science, Medline, and DOAJ. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the first 3, really. Medline is very, very hard to get accepted for, so put that to one side. And DOAJ is for open access journals, and we tend to put that into application quite early. So if we move on to the next slide, I'd like to show you a little bit about the decision-making process that goes on behind these services. They have similarities, but they have differences. So if we take Clarivate Web of Science on the top row, you can see that they have a triage process. So if we send a journal in for them to be reviewed, then the editorial assistants will be looking at some of the basic things in the journal. For example, is the ISSN registered? Is it an English language journal? Are all the links working? that they can see in the Guide for Authors, for example. All of that, let's assume all being well, then it gets passed along to the editors, and they're the ones that do the actual editorial evaluation. Now, if you submit a journal to Clariva, it can take really up to a year before you get a result back, because they get many, many journals submitted to them. So it just takes a long time. And once the editors look at it, it takes them some time as well to get through the journals. But once they have a recommendation for the journal, then it goes from there to the senior editorial team, and they'll make the decision on whether to accept or reject the journal. Now, for Scopus, you could say it has a lot of similarities to Web of Science, and it does. They have an application triage team. So when we put a journal into application, they're again looking at some of the basic requirements of the journal. That they're also looking at secondary citations, which I'll talk about shortly because it's a very specific area. So they pass it through all the general checks, and then it goes to the CSAB, and that's the Scopus Content Advisory Board. So they have experts in each subject area. They sit in their own chairs, if you like, and they carry out the editorial evaluation and make a decision on the acceptance. So this is a much faster process for them. So when you put a journal into evaluation for them, with them, it takes up to 4 to 5 months, and then you should have your decision on whether it's accepted or not. The last journal I've got listed, the last indexation service, PubMed Central, listed here. So they have an in-house triage team, the publisher liaison group, and they're carrying out some basic checks once again. But from there, it goes to actually to external consultants. So they carry out the scientific and editorial quality assessment. That will be a scientist in the subject area and a medical librarian. They make a recommendation, and that is then up to the NLM whether they want to follow the recommendation made, or whether they want to maybe accept the journal. And we do sometimes see that is not always the same. So looking at a bit more depth at the 3 main indexation services I want to cover here, as to what is really important for them. So for Clariva, Web of Science, my colleague already mentioned, is they do go through the Guide for Authors in great detail, and everything that you publish in your Guide for Authors is they're going to check whether that is indeed actually so on your journal online. So if you have in your Guide for Authors or in your website, for example, that you publish, I don't know, should we say 30, 40 articles there every year, then they will be looking and counting on the website to make sure that you actually do stick to the timeline for your journal and you are publishing what you say you're going to publish. Another very important area for them is the presence of ethical statements. So every article should have a conflict of interest statement or declaration of interest. Also, there should be a patient consent statement if it involves human research in any way. If there's any animal testing being done in the article, then they'll want to see the proper statement regarding animal welfare. And they do really look at this on article level. They go into it in great depth. Another thing that they're looking at closely now is not just the editorial affiliation details for the editorial board, because they've been doing that for a long time anyway, but they're now paying very close attention to guest editors for special issues and collections. I think for a lot of indexation services and publishers, you would have seen in the past maybe just a name there, maybe not even a name, just, you know, guest edited and then the details. But now they want the full information about these people as well. So also the content has to be relevant to the journal. So you have to be publishing within the scope and not straying outside, or that will get you rejected. You should adhere to all the community standards as they are. When we say author distribution in yellow here, we mean by that if you say that you're an international journal of, I don't know, cardiology, then you really should be international, and they should be able to see that your authors are coming, you know, from all different parts of the globe and not just one particular country, for example. And then the last box on the right-hand side here, content significance. This has always typically been a bit of a grey area for us because it's very hard to define whether your content is significant or not. But Clariva Web of Science, they'll make a decision on that, and that will, pass or fail you either way. If they fail you for Web of Science application, you do typically have a 2-year embargo before you could try again. But that gives you enough time to go away and improve the journal and take on board any comments that they might have made. And if we move on to Scopus, we can see this is not such a busy slide. So everything is fairly standard, you could say. But I've put one big arrow here under journal standing, and that is they do a lot of work looking at the citedness of journal articles in Scopus. Now, if your journal is not in Scopus, then you could argue, well, I don't have any citations yet. But just because your journal is not in Scopus, it doesn't mean that you're not being cited by other journals that are in Scopus. So there is a bit of a complex search you can do on Scopus to find out how many secondary citations, because that is what they're called, you may have. And this is very important for the CSAB to see whether you're ready to be included in their database. So they would typically be looking for around 15 secondary citations, but it does depend on the subject area as well. Now, they don't give us an indication on what they'd expect to see per subject area, but just from past experience, I know around 15 or more citations will be a big help to you. If you only have, say, 5 or 6 secondary citations, then they won't put you through into full evaluation. Then they'll stop you at the door in the triage part of the evaluation, and they'll recommend to you to hold your application until you can actually move forward with more citations. But otherwise, you can see that they're looking at the publication schedule again, looking to see that, you know, your journal is in English, clarity of abstracts, so all the typical things that you'd expect to see from other indexation services. Now, when we move on to PMC, once again, they've got different areas that they're looking at in the application process when they get to the scientific quality checks. But these parts that I flagged up in yellow, these are really the important ones that, you know, you would need to focus on with your journal. So at the early stage, making sure, as I said, that all the links are working, that you mention all of your editorial policies in your guide for authors. You have good peer review statements, good statements on, well, basically on ethical levels. So your conflict of interest, your human and animal rights, that all has to be there. You should always be publishing within the biomedical and life science area. Although if you have a journal that is fairly broad and is covering more topics, as long as 25% of your papers fall within this area, then they will consider it for an application. All being well, is once you pass to the scientific quality stage, this is really the hardest one to pass, we find, because they're looking at the scientific content of your journal, in great depth, I'll say. So obviously looking at the policies as well, but they're also doing things like making sure that all your figures have got a legend, that if you have tables there, that they're well described, what they're actually supposed to be showing. Looking again at the editorial board and authorship and publication schedule, that's a bit of a general one. But if I was to look at, so, you know, the number of rejections that I see coming back from PubMed Central, is they typically all say that they're looking for an improvement in the scientific quality of the journal and the articles. So that is pretty much their focus now. So if they reject your title, then it is a 2-year embargo again. Yeah, and that gives you time once again to improve your journal. So my last slide I want to share with you here is I do even get asked quite a lot if there's just an image or something that we could share that just shows how do they calculate the impact factor. And this is probably the tidiest one that I have, and this is from this year, so the JCR 2023, and that is all the citations from 2022 last year divided over the citable content in 2020 and 2021 that we published. And what do we mean by citable content? So this is content that has been through the full peer review process. So this will be full articles, original research, review articles, short communications, as long as they're good short communications and not a letter to the editor, of course. So that's something quite different. So anything that presents new findings, new research, that is a citable item. And that is what the citations are divided over. And if you have an impact factor of 3.5, I've just given that here for example, it just means that on average, your article was published over 1 to 2 years ago was cited 3.5 times. So it's quite a simple sum. When you see it like this, it makes it quite easy, I think, for you. And that is the last slide that I have. And now I'll pass you over to Dana, my colleague, to talk about marketing. I'll stop sharing.
I hope you can see my slide. I will talk a bit about marketing at launch and post-launch. First of all, I will talk about the main goals of the marketing activities around a new journal launch. First of all, it's about raising awareness about the new launch, basically about bringing researchers to the new journal, to its homepage, to find out about the aims and scope of the new journal, spreading the message through different channels to as many relevant authors as possible, and have targeted campaigns towards authors that are connected to the new launch. It's also about creating a reputation for the new journal. And this is why marketing will highlight any relationship that exists between a new launch and an already existing journal, if that exists. And it will also highlight the expertise of the editorial team, organizing, for instance, sessions in which authors can meet the editors of the new launch. It's also about bringing submissions to the journals. This is also one of the goals of marketing. So it's about encouraging authors to submit to the new launch, understand what their options are for publication, and also ensure that messages about any kind of waivers or discounts are very clear and known by the authors. In terms of marketing activities, a few tips. It's about planning the launch announcements. So planning for the call for papers for the new launch, announcing the first articles and the first issue of the journal as it is published, to ensure that you have up-to-date landing pages and also social media sites, and use banners and in-text messaging to highlight the fact that there's a new journal in the field. We also noticed from our experience, and this is another tip, that email marketing campaigns are very useful to share the news. It's also useful to plan an event around the launch, usually at a conference. Also to make use of the editors and the publishers network to inform everyone about the launch, and also to invite submissions to the new journal. And other activities that are good to undertake are to produce flyers and posters for the editors so that they can spread the news to their networks, as well as to make sure that the journal homepage has everything up to date. So the pods there are populated with information on any news, webinars, and so on. And I'll stop sharing and let Helen the next slides.
Right. Thank you, Dana. Okay, so we're gonna wrap this up now by, sorry, share my screen again. Hope you can see my screen. So, an important message that we'd like to convey as we are now coming to the end of our presentation is that the work on a new journal doesn't really end or even significantly reduces after the journal has been launched. In fact, it's the first 3 to 5 years after the launch that are very critical for the success of a new journal. And this time has to be very collaborative between the publisher and the editorial team. And if there's a society involved, then also together with that society. So in order to have a chance to attract high quality submissions to a journal that's not yet indexed, in the beginning, the editors' networks are absolutely crucial. I know we've been saying that throughout our session, but it really comes down to the editors' networks for a number of these key activities around a new journal. Yeah, the same goes for finding supportive reviewers. We really rely on the editors to work their friends and colleagues to help us out in the first years. And of course, as we've heard, marketing needs to accompany all of these efforts to put the journal on the map and raise awareness and interest in the community to make them understand that this is their journal, and the success of the journal kind of also relies on them using the journal for their publication needs. Okay, so I have the pleasure of summarizing the last 35 to 40 minutes or so for you in these key takeaway points. So first off, what we've heard is that market research is the key to understanding if and what kind of journal launch makes sense. You should try and partner up with a strong and experienced publishing partner to work this all out together with you. You need to make sure that you pick a sustainable business model that is supported by the author community that you're trying to serve. And the proposal outline that we've shared with you in detail, please use that as a checklist to work off from throughout the process. You should also make sure that all of the community-facing communications, such as the website, the aims and scope, the guide for author, are all very well written with clear instructions so that you get the kind of content that you want to attract. And for all of the flaws some of the metrics may have, getting the journal indexed is crucial for the long-term success of that journal, as is marketing support up to the launch and in the years after. So if we need to summarize all this in one sentence, launching a new journal is a huge undertaking, and it takes a lot of dedicated people coming together to make it work. Thank you. So I think I've seen that there are questions in the chat that we want to address. Again, use the chat or raise your hand, and Jagna will make it possible that you can ask your question. I would like to put this on in the background. So Jagna, Dana, or Geraldine, could you read out, or I can even do that, I can see them here, the questions. I think we have 2 questions in the chat. The first one is, could you please suggest science development organizations and so on who provide grants for publishing articles in business model journals? So I think this is a question around funding, and maybe what we said earlier in terms of look where the funding goes to find out where a new journal launch might make sense. I'm also sharing this question with my co-presenters, but I think Saival would let us help identify funding trends. If you're looking at this from sort of an author perspective, I think in our submission process, it's very easy to select during submission the funder that you may have benefited from, and we would then automatically check if you could publish at no charge because we have an agreement with that funder. So there are 2 perspectives to it. Dana, Geraldine, do you want to add anything, or anyone else to that question? No?
Sounds
Covered
good.
everything? Okay. And then I think the second question is the very low salaries of employees of medical universities in Ukraine do not allow them to send articles to Western journals, and articles with a dozen authors are not prestigious. What are possible ways to solve such a problem, in addition to increasing the salaries of our scientists? I can start off. So obviously, this is a very common, unfortunate problem, and a solution obviously also ideally needs to take place in the research community for getting you know, better salaries and recognition there. But I am of the opinion that Ukraine authors can publish free of charge in our open access journals. That the APC is waived for them. And we do have such programs in place for low-income countries when it comes to open access. But in general, I do think that this is a challenge that open access has, that it might not be as accessible depending on what the funding situation is in the country. And Maria has shown how open access uptake differentiates in different geographic locations. So I think that's why we still also publish a large number of hybrid journals where the choice is really with the author to decide what their funding situation is, what they can afford. And if there are no fundings available or no waiver program that they can use, then they would publish under the subscription model.
Yeah, to clarify that there is no cost to publishing, no cost for the author to publishing under the subscription model.
Yeah.
And most of our, or many of our journals are hybrid, so they offer the subscription route to the authors.
Yeah.
And maybe may I also add to this by saying that even on this slide you see there's mention about APC waivers, so they are open access fee waivers. It's another name for this, and so please use that QR code to find out more. We can also share, we have a platform where we actually created a special support for Ukrainian authors, and it's still in place. So if you wish to publish in an open access journal, then there is an opportunity to do so and to have the the fee, the publication fee, waived. So please do ask questions directly either to me or to my colleagues after this session, and we will be able to provide you with a bit more detailed information about this as well, because it is a good question. But as Dana and Helen already mentioned, we have indeed, most of our journals are hybrid journals, allowing for both either subscription or open access. So that for author, that means a choice.
Any
It
other
goes for
questions?
many publishers. It's not only Elsevier, it goes for many.
It's on all, indeed. So maybe I will stop recording here, and if there are any questions from the attendees, it would be lovely to hear from you.